I want to begin a journey with you today of something the Lord has been dealing with me about over the last couple of months. And I wanted to share it. At 8:30 this morning, I decided to cut this in two. And I said to my wife, I'm going to cut the message in half. She goes, "Oh, great." That's the kind of support I have. Actually, her theory and philosophy behind that is it would give us more time to chew on what we're on eating, which is a good thing. Now, I'm going to ask Leo if he would do one thing for me. Leo, that back projector is not centered on the screen, and I can't go forward until it's centered. There we go. Okay. Now, if you want to know how to drive someone like me crazy, just give me a cell phone with all those little red notification numbers on every app. I want to begin a journey with you today that we're going to begin in a place called Shiloh. Here is the scripture in Joshua chapter 18, verse 1. After they conquered the land, the entire community of Israel assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of the Lord's presence. Shiloh was a secluded site within the tribe of Ephraim. And it was pretty much in the center of the entire Promised Land. It was accessible to everyone in the Promised Land. And it was the place where God permanently established the tabernacle of Moses, where it would no longer move again. And it became the original house of the Lord. It became the meeting place with God. In fact, God says in Jeremiah 7:12, He said, "Shiloh is where I chose to set my name at the first." And so the name of the Lord was resident at Shiloh. If you want to know where it is, it's right there on the map, which doesn't give you a lot, but I can tell you two things. Jerusalem is to the south, and everything to the north are all the other tribes. And there is a place called Shiloh. And this is what it looks like today. And I think probably when the tabernacle was established on Shiloh, that it was probably set on that hill on the left side. Now, if you can imagine that for a moment, that Israel would come to that hill, they would come to that mount, and there the high priests and the priests were ministering and serving, and they would come and they would worship and they would celebrate and they would sacrifice. This is where Elkanah and Hannah came, where Hannah heard the voice of the Lord. It is an annual meeting place for feasting and celebrating. And it is an interesting name itself, Shiloh. And I want to break it down for you just a little bit and let you see. Shiloh has actually 3 Hebrew consonants in it. Now, in Hebrew, the consonants are about 98% of everything. The vowels just sort of find their way in there. Now, you can imagine if you're a translator and you're given an ancient Hebrew text or a scroll, what you're going to see is you're going to see Hebrew letters running from right to left with no spaces between the words and no vowels between the consonants. And the way that it worked was, it's understood in the Hebrew language that certain consonants, when they are in certain order, they mean a certain thing. And so the first letter is what is called a sheen. And then the second letter is a lamed, and the last letter is a hey. Now, that makes an SH, an L, and an H. Now, there is another letter that is very similar to Sheen, and it's called Seen. And instead of the word being SH, it would just be H. Now, can you think of any word that you've ever come across in the Hebrew, in the Bible, that would be sort of a transliteration of Hebrew that would be SLH? What would that be? Well, now Shalom would have a mem on it. This, if you take the H off and you just do SLH, can you think of anything that you have probably read hundreds of times? Selah. Selah. Because when you come across a Selah, which is very similar to a Shiloh, one is, and you know what's interesting is, back then they had people who had trouble pronouncing things just like we do. And in the book of Judges, it just happens to be in the tribe of Ephraim. The tribe of Ephraim apparently had difficulty with the pronunciation of SH. And so they would pronounce it as an S without the H. And so when the men of Gibeon were trying to weed out the Ephraimites that were coming across the brook, in Judges chapter 7, this is actually in the Bible, they would say to them, say Shibboleth. And if they said Sibboleth, they knew they were Ephraimites. Now, what's sort of interesting to me is that God would name a place Shiloh where the people in that vicinity couldn't even pronounce it right. Oh, well, that's God. But when you have the Sheen, the Lamed, and the Hay together, and I've reversed it so it looks more like what we're used to, these are the kinds of things that come out of that combination of consonants. Shiloh is a place of rest. It's a place of peace. It's a place of birthing. It was in Shiloh that everyone received their lot of their inheritance. They were sent out. It was a place of destiny. It was also a very prophetic place. There were prophets that were raised there. Can you think of a prophet that got his beginning in Shiloh? Who? Samuel, yes. Elkanah and Hannah took Samuel back, gave him back to the Lord into the hands of Eli and his sons, and out of this prophetic anointing began to rise in Israel. He was a prophet and a priest and served as a judge in Israel. So when you look at this, Shiloh has a lot of promise just in the name of it. Now, the interesting thing about Shiloh is that for 300 years, the presence of God and the name of the Lord were established on that hill, and people could come. They got revelation there. They had encounters with God. But at the end of that 300-year period, Shiloh was actually destroyed by the Philistine army. And that occurred in 1094 BC. And when that destruction came, there were some things that happened as a result of that shook the nation. Israel never really got over the destruction of the tabernacle of Moses. There were 4 things that happened during this time of destruction. The first one was that the ark was stolen. The second one was that the glory of God was taken back. The third was that all of the ministering vessels around the ark were either lost or stolen or forgotten. So ministry, what we would call spirit ministry, the ministry of the Lord, was effectively shut down. And then the other thing was that the tent was vacated. This is what David says about that instant. In Psalm 78:6, he says, he abandoned his tent in Shiloh, the home where he had lived among us. Now, this was a traumatic, tragic, significant event. God had committed to put his name there. And for years and years, his name was established there and people were encountering him. But somehow, they woke up one day and it was all destroyed. In a day, the Philistines came and totally destroyed Shiloh. And you may wonder why that would happen. And I think that there are lessons that come from Shiloh that help us to understand how God works and what is actually happening. This was a surprise to them. It was a shock to them. But all of a sudden, in a short period of time, the ark was stolen. The glory departed. In fact, Eli's daughter-in-law gave birth to a son that day, and she named that son Ichabod, which means the glory has departed. The tent was vacated. God was no longer there. There was a tent, but there was no God. Now, that is the scariest part of this. There was a tent, but no God. And then the ministering vessels were strewn around, destroyed, lost, stolen, and forgotten. Now, what happened that caused this? The deception was that they didn't see this coming, and that as it began to progress, it took them by surprise. It literally came as a thief in the night. And so what I'd like to do is this week and then in 2 weeks' time, I want to share a couple of what I consider to be the lessons from Shiloh. What is it that we can take from Shiloh that help us to make sure that we don't experience something similar to what they did? It's a very sobering thing. And so I want to begin with just one lesson today. And it is this. They settled for less and less glory. You see, by the time you get to the days of Eli, this is what is happening in Israel. In those days, this is 1 Samuel 3:12, when the boy Samuel was serving the Lord under the direction of Eli, there were very few messages from the Lord, and visions from him were quite rare. In other words, the glory of God had begun to wane at the tabernacle. The presence of God had begun already to withdraw. And by the time of Eli, what you have is very few revelations, very few visions, very few interventions of God. People are not really encountering God. Now, all of the things are going on around the tabernacle. They have their rituals, they have their routines, they have all of these things going. And you say, but Pastor Buddy, how can you tell that the glory was waning? Well, I think the best way you can tell is when you look at Eli's sons. Here is what the Bible says about Eli's sons in 1 Samuel 2:12. There were two of them. They served as priests before the God. They were the caretakers of the ark, if you can imagine. They were the caretakers. They were the priests of the house. They stood at the door of the tabernacle. And this is what it says in 1 Samuel 2:12. Eli's sons were good for nothing, Now, in the original, if you go back to the King James, it says they were sons of Belial, which sounds worse, but it actually means pretty much the same thing. They were not serving the Lord. And it says they didn't honor the Lord. Now, a couple of other translations say they did not recognize the Lord's authority, and they were disobedient, and they refused to obey the Lord. Now, I think that Eli's sons are not just real men in a real situation, but they also represent opposing spirits that cause what was happening in Israel. In other words, when someone is settling for less and less glory, less and less presence, you see, by the time you get to Eli and his sons, people are not really expecting a lot from God. And in fact, if you take a look at our nation and what is happening on any given Sunday, I would say to you that most anywhere you look in our nation, people are not expecting a lot from God. They have this church as normal, worship as usual, in and out. Hey, it's a Sunday or a Saturday night or whatever. Now, that's not a criticism. I think that is just a valid interpretation of what's going on. People do not tend to go to church expecting to encounter an all-powerful God. By the way they act, you can tell they don't. By what people do when they're in church can tell you they don't really expect God to break forth in their midst. And so this was the prevailing attitude, and I believe that these two sons of Eli reflect attitudes or spirits that perpetuate this kind of settling for less and less. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. God's been raking me over the coals with this for the last month or two. And I'm just bringing it to you now because I felt that it was the time to do that. I'm certainly not interested in raking you over anything. I'm so hot from all of this that I want to put some cold water on it myself. But consider this. There were two sons. The first one, his name was Hophni. Hophni means the pugilist. You go, oh, wow, what does that mean? Well, a pugilist is like a boxer. And a boxer learns how to deflect. He learns how to counter. And what it means is that basically, no matter what the Lord might send my way, I've got a way to counter that. I can deflect that. If it's a prodding, it's a little provoking, it's a little interfering, a little intermingling, I can just prompt it. Now, this is exactly what the resurrected Lord spoke to Saul when he was on the road to Damascus. He said to him, you know, you're having a tough time because you are kicking against the goad. Now, I used to think that that meant that he was kicking. But actually, that's not what the word means. The word does not mean to kick forward. It means to kick with your heel. In other words, it's when the farmer goads the oxen will take their leg and do like this and say, stop it. I don't want you to goad me. I don't want you to provoke me. I don't want you to mess with me, right? I'm okay. I'm comfortable. I've got less and less glory, but I'm comfortable, right? By the way, the people were being ripped off by Eli's sons, absolutely ripped off. Their offerings were being taken, all these kind of things. These guys were involved in immoral acts right at the door of the tabernacle. And the first one, he's the one that just sort of goes, yeah, I know I need to, And it is an attitude or it is a spirit that just where you get in a place where you just sort of get pretty good at sort of deflecting. Whatever the Holy Spirit's saying, tomorrow, later. Anybody Yeah, thank you. We have two honest people in here. And it happens. And the other son, you're going to love him. His name was Phineas. And his name means the mouth of the serpent. Great sons, by the way. And it is not what is coming out of his mouth, but rather it's the bite. You remember when Paul puts the wood in the fire and the serpent comes out and grabs him? Well, one of the marks of the serpent is when they get their fangs in you, they don't let go. There is a willfulness that is in the mouth of the serpent. There is a tenacity that says, no, I'm not going to let go. And Paul had to, in the name of Jesus, had to shake the thing off of him. But there is, in this sense, a willfulness. Phineas is the one that says, no, I'm not going to change. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm staying right here. Now, I believe that those two spirits or attitudes contribute to an atmosphere where I am having less and less, seeing less and less glory, being settled with less and less glory. Now, you say, Pastor Buddy, how do you know that the glory was waning? Because if you will rewind with me all the way back. Oh, by the way, this is what it says in 1 Samuel 2:17. It was a horrible sin these young servants were committing, and right in the presence of God. Now, this is right in the presence of God. Wow. Now, here's what it says in Leviticus. Here we have a different high priest, different sons, different season, but we have the same God, same tabernacle, and same ark, right? Leviticus 10:1, Nadab and Abihu were two of Aaron's sons. Aaron was the high priest, but they disobeyed the Lord by burning incense to him on a fire pan when they were not supposed to. In other words, what they basically said was, hey, this is from the Lord when it's not. I mean, how many people are doing that? Yeah, this is from the Lord, but it's not. This is, God approves of this. And they took it in before the Lord. The one scripture calls it strange fire. Suddenly, the Lord sent fiery flames and burned them to death. The reason why that happened is because the glory of the Lord was so strong, it would not permit that to go on. When the glory wanes and when the presence wanes, it allows other things to coexist right in the presence of God, right near the presence of God. And it looks like that God's okay with it when actually He's not. That's the deception. Now, if you fast forward all the way past Eli, fast forward into a new season, a different season, I want to bring you to, believe it or not, post-resurrection, different time, different people, but same God. Two people in the presence of God, fudged just a little, and we have two funerals. Why? Because the glory and the presence of God was so strong in that gathering where it was literally the porch of the temple. They didn't even have their own building. They're just meeting somewhere. The glory was that strong that it took them out. Now, little by little, God's people decided that was a little too dangerous. And they sort of liked things not quite so intense. We like it when it's easier. we don't have to be quite as careful, quite as reverent. Hey, at least we know that when we go, we're going to come home from church. We're going to come back from Shiloh. The glory began to wane. Now, here is what God said about that situation. Here's what he told Jeremiah. This is an amazing scripture. This is God speaking. In Jeremiah 5:31, the men of God say things that are not true. Some translations say prophets. However you slice it, that doesn't sound very good. The men of God say things that are not true. If someone gives you the impression of one thing when God's heart is different from that, they're telling you something that's not true. And the religious leaders rule by their own thoughts. They just simply do what they want. But look at this next thing. This must have broken God's heart. Said, I can handle the men of God messing up. I can handle the religious leaders. I'll deal with them. But my people love to have it this way. But what will you do in the end? Now, the Message translation has it this way. My people love it. They eat it up. But what will you do when it's time to pick up the pieces? Wow. We live in an environment that is anti-glory. It is anti-presence. Doesn't mean anything's wrong. It's just where we live. This world is anti-glory. It doesn't help you to move into the glory of God. It doesn't help you nurture the presence of God. In fact, the bent and the slant and the prejudice against the presence of God is so strong that if you do not purpose to pursue the presence of God, you and I will end up doing what they did. We'll just settle for less and less. Now remember the deception. The deception is that it goes so slowly that you don't realize it. I mean, this is why people say, well, how could those people, they went through that Red Sea and they saw all that God did. And then they're complaining, and slowly it slips and drains away. And then there are just generations of people who no longer have any expectation at all that this Lord God Almighty is actually a Lord God Almighty, and that anything that happens to be in the Bible by chance might actually spring to life while we get together. Wow. Here is a scripture that I think is at the bottom of all of this. What is at work? What is it that is working against God's people that causes us to just start to settle? I mean, we're prone to settle anyway. You remember the 3 tribes? We like it here. No, 2.5 tribes. Well, we like it over here. Yeah, we'll take this. And God's pushing more, and they just want to settle. I want to show you a scripture. And I want you to pretend that you've never read this before. Okay? This is brand new. Do that old thing. All right? Okay, here we go. Mark 14, 3 through 6. Now Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of Simon, a man Jesus had healed of leprosy. Now I think that if Jesus had healed me of leprosy, I'd want to invite him to my house. I think that's a great thing. This is one of the reasons why Jesus healed so many people, because he knew that if he healed them, that it would open their hearts to the kingdom. That's how awesome he is. And as he was reclining at the table, a woman came into the house holding an alabaster flask. Now, this is extremely costly. It is said that alabaster, in order to have an alabaster flask, you would have had to have brought that in by caravan from thousands of miles away, that would have come from the east. And here's what it says. It was filled with the highest quality of fragrant and expensive oil. She walked right up to Jesus, and with a gesture of extreme devotion, she broke the flask and poured out the precious oil over his head. Wow. Right in the middle of lunch, she's having a moment with Jesus. Anybody know what happened next? Everyone in the room stood up and applauded, right? Here is what happened next. But some were highly indignant when they saw this, and they complained to one another. Now, Mark is a little bit gracious, because the some ones that are complaining are a lot of disciples. And in one version of this, it is Judas that is the ringleader, because he was a thief and he wanted to get his hands on that. He could see that coming into the offering, right? Oh, she's going to put that in the offering, and then I get to distribute that for myself. By the way, you got to love Jesus. He spent 3.5 years in ministry, and someone was stealing from him the entire time, and he still prospered. That's great. Now, this is what they complained to one another, saying, "What a total waste." This is a waste. It could have been sold for a great sum, and the money could have benefited the poor. So they scolded her harshly. I mean, they are letting her have it. Jesus said to them, "Leave her alone. Why are you so critical of this woman? She has honored me with this beautiful act of kindness." Now, I want you to listen to what they are telling her. Forget about what she's doing for a minute. And I want you to listen to the spirit behind what they are saying. They are telling her, you could do something much more practical and profitable with your time, with your investment, with your all, with who you are, than spending it on the presence of God. I mean, it's just not practical. There's just so many other things that you can do rather than encountering and engaging the presence of God. That is the spirit of this age, right there. That's the bombardment that we get continually. And little by little, it wears away until we find ourselves settling for less and less of the fire, the presence, the cloud, the glory, the breakthrough, the victory. After the destruction of the tabernacle in 1094 BC, the remnants of the tabernacle and what was left after the destruction were all gathered together, and they moved this on this nomadic journey throughout various places in the central part of the Promised Land for 300 years. And you know what they did? For 300 years, they had priests, they had rituals, They had routines. They had all of these. They followed the letter of the law perfectly. But there was no God there. No ark. No presence. No glory. Can you imagine? For 300 years. You say, Pastor Buddy, what happened after that? The tabernacle fell into extinction. Why? Because God had forsaken it. And He does not rebuild what He forsakes. And all of the routines and all, David had them. The ark was on top of Mount Zion, but Zadok and the priests were still keeping things alive. And it had the semblance of all being God. And yet, it was void and vacant. They had the fire, they had the lampstand, they had everything, but God was nowhere around. And after 300 years or so, actually, I think it was about 190 years, something like that. Yeah, it was, because it was about 900 and something BC, the thing just went into extinction. No one ever heard from it again. No one ever saw it again. It was totally forgotten. The very thing that God had built to house His name and His presence was gone. Why? Because at the very beginning, they decided, without deciding, to settle for less and less. I don't want God to say to me, "You settled." You were happy with that. Now, I want to tell you today, this is not the kind of message that you would expect to where you could build a big church. But I think you've figured it out by now. That's not my intention. I think the question that the Holy Spirit has been asking me, and probably is asking you now, is this: have you settled? Have you settled? It doesn't make you a bad person. But the key is, when the Holy Spirit pokes and says, yeah, if that heel goes up, watch out. I don't want God to say of Tower City Church, they settled. I could have done this. I could have shown this. I could have been this. They settled. Would you stand with me?